I reached for the letter on the table without a second thought. It was addressed to him, sealed, confidential, official.
For all of us.
He was already smiling,
Let's discuss
already
this
celebrating.
properly.
What he didn't know was that my name was buried behind every success he thought was his. Wait, he said suddenly, standing up, let's talk about this outside.
Wait, let's talk about this outside.
As you can see from these projections, the young man at the front of the room said, his voice tight with nervous energy, Chef Tech Solutions has positioned itself at the intersection of culinary innovation and artificial intelligence. Our smart kitchen appliances aren't just gadgets. They're learning systems that adapt to individual cooking styles. Before we continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Now let's continue. Dietary needs and flavor preferences. Sarah's eyes moved from the slides to the presenter. Marcus Chun, her husband of 7 years, stood there in his best suit, the navy one she'd helped him pick out 3 months ago at Nordstrom. He looked confident, passionate, alive in a way she hadn't seen in years. His hands moved expressively as he talked about moisture sensors and temperature algorithms, about partnerships with meal kit companies and expansion into European markets. She wanted to reach out and touch him, to squeeze his hand and tell him how proud she was. Instead, she remained perfectly still, her face a mask of professional interest, just another venture capitalist in a room full of them. The food tech market is projected to reach $342 billion by 2027, Marcus continued, clicking to the next slide. We're not just selling smart ovens and refrigerators. We're selling a comprehensive ecosystem that reduces food waste by up to 40%, cuts meal preparation time in half, and makes restaurant-quality cooking accessible to anyone. Sarah had heard this pitch before in fragments, late at night when Marcus thought she was asleep. She'd heard him on the phone with his co-founder, David, working through the numbers, revising and refining. She watched him pour everything into this company. His savings, his time, his dreams. What he didn't know was that she'd been pouring something into it too. Questions? Marcus asked, and Sarah watched as the other investors leaned forward. Your burn rate is concerning, said Gerald Whitmore from Apex Capital, a man whose reputation for brutal negotiations preceded him. You're hemorrhaging cash. What happens when you run out of runway? Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, a tell that Sarah recognized from hundreds of difficult conversations. We've been conservative with our projections. Our current funding will take us through the next 18 months, at which point our revenue streams will be sufficient to... Will they, though? Whitmore interrupted. Consumer electronics is a graveyard of well-meaning startups. What makes you different? Sarah watched Marcus's hands clench briefly at his sides before he smiled, the professional smile he'd practiced in their bathroom mirror. What makes us different is that we're not just selling products. We're building a platform. Every device we sell becomes a data point, helping us improve the system. We have a 78% customer retention rate, and our users average 4.3 stars in satisfaction ratings. They're not just buying our products, they're joining our ecosystem. The presentation continued for another 20 minutes. Sarah watched it all with the practiced neutrality she'd cultivated over the past year, ever since she'd made a decision that would change everything between her and Marcus, even if he never knew it, when it was over. The investors filed out with their assistants and their leather-bound notebooks, shaking Marcus's hand with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Sarah hung back, letting the others leave first, then approached him as if for the first time. Mr. Chun, she said, extending her hand. Impressive presentation. Marcus shook her hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. This close. She could see the exhaustion around his eyes, the slight stubble he'd missed while shaving that morning in their bathroom. Thank you, MS. Whitfield, Sarah said smoothly, using her maiden name, Catherine Whitfield, Meridian Ventures. It was surreal. Introducing herself to her own husband with a fake name, watching his eyes scan her face with polite professional interest and no recognition at all. But then she'd been careful. The blonde wig, the colored contacts that changed her eyes from brown to blue, the glasses with clear lenses, the different makeup style. She'd studied the art of transformation with the dedication she brought to everything. I'd like to discuss your funding needs in more detail, she continued. Perhaps we could set up a meeting for next week? Of course, Marcus said, and she could hear the hope trying to break through his professional demeanor. That would be excellent. Should I have my assistant reach out to yours? I'll have my people contact you, Sarah said, already turning away. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chan. She walked out of that conference room with her heart pounding, made it all the way to the elevator before allowing herself to breathe. As the doors closed and she began her descent from the 43rd floor, Sarah caught a reflection in the polished metal doors. Who was this woman staring back at her? Not Sarah Chun, wife and elementary school teacher. Not the woman who made pancakes on Sunday mornings and laughed at Marcus's terrible jokes. No, this was Catherine Whitfield, venture capitalist, the woman who was about to invest $10 million in her husband's company without him ever knowing who she really was. Part 2, The Inheritance. 6 months earlier, Sarah had been grading spelling tests at the kitchen table when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She'd almost let it go to voicemail. Telemarketers were relentless. But something made her answer. "Is this Sarah Whitfield, Chin?" An elderly man's voice had asked. "Yes, this is Sarah." "Ms. Chun, my name is Robert Thornton. I'm an attorney with Thornton, Burke & Associates in Boston. I'm calling regarding the estate of your great-aunt, Margaret Whitfield." Sarah had frowned, trying to place the name. "I'm sorry, I don't think I know a Margaret Whitfield." "That's understandable. According to our records, you never met her. She was your maternal grandmother's older sister. She passed away 3 weeks ago at the age of 97. "I'm sorry to hear that," Sarah had said automatically, still confused about why this man was calling her about a relative she'd never known existed. "Ms. Chun, I'm calling because you're named as a beneficiary in her will. I need to discuss the details of your inheritance with you. Would you be available to come to our offices in Boston, or would you prefer a video conference?" That's when Sarah's heart had started to beat faster. An inheritance? I don't understand. How much are we talking about? There had been a pause on the other end of the line. "Ms. Chun, perhaps we should discuss this in person. The estate is substantial." 2 weeks later, Sarah had sat in Robert Thornton's mahogany paneled office in downtown Boston, trying to process what he was telling her. $32 million, she repeated, the numbers feeling surreal in her mouth. "My great-aunt, who I never met, left me $32 million. Robert Thornton, a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and kind eyes, nodded. "Your great-aunt Margaret was a remarkable woman. She never married, never had children. She worked as a nurse during World War II, then went to business school on the GI Bill. Quite unusual for a woman at that time. She invested wisely, lived frugally, and over the decades accumulated considerable wealth." He slid a photograph across the desk. Sarah picked it up, studying the black and white image of a young woman in a nurse's uniform, standing beside a military ambulance. The woman had the same nose as Sarah's mother, the same determined set to her jaw that Sarah saw in her own mirror every morning. "Why me?" Sarah had asked. She had an entire family. Why leave it to someone she never met? Thornton had pulled out a letter, its envelope yellow with age. "She left this for you. Perhaps it will explain." With trembling hands, Sarah had opened the envelope and read, "Dear Sarah, we never met, and for that, I am truly sorry. The rift between your grandmother and me was my fault. Pride and stubbornness are the curses of the Whitfield women, as you may discover. By the time I swallowed my pride enough to reach out, your grandmother had passed, and the opportunity was lost. I followed your life from afar. When your mother died, my great-niece, though we never spoke, I wanted to reach out, but I was a coward. Instead, I've watched you from the shadows. I know you became a teacher, that you married a good man, that you've built a kind and generous life. I'm leaving you this money because I see in you what I wish I had been, someone brave enough to love fully, to take risks, to be more than the sum of safe choices. I never married, never had children, never took the chances I should have. I built wealth, but I'm not sure I built a life. Don't make my mistakes, Sarah. Use this money not just wisely, but bravely. Take the chances I never did. Love fiercely. Dream bigger than I ever allowed myself to dream. The only condition I impose is this. Use this gift to change a life, yours or someone else's. Make it matter. With love and regret, Your great Aunt Margaret. Sarah had read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. When she looked up, Thornton had been politely examining something on his desk, giving her privacy for her grief. "What do I do now?" she'd asked. "Now," Thornton had said gently. "You decide what kind of life you want to build with this gift." Sarah hadn't told Marcus about the inheritance immediately. She needed time to think, to process, to understand what this meant. She'd flown home to Seattle, the letter folded in her purse, feeling like she was carrying a secret too enormous to share. Marcus had picked her up from the airport, kissing her hello, asking about her trip to visit her sick college roommate in Boston. The lie she'd told, hating herself for it. "How's Emma doing?" he'd asked as they drove home. "Better," Sarah had said, the deception tasting bitter on her tongue. "She's going to be fine." That night, she'd lain awake beside Marcus, listening to him breathe, watching the shadows of tree branches dance across the ceiling. $32 million. It was an impossible amount, a life-changing amount, a responsibility that felt crushing. Her first instinct had been to tell Marcus immediately. They were partners, married, building a life together. Of course she should tell him. But then she thought about what her great-aunt had written. Use this gift to change a life. Make it matter. And she thought about Marcus, about his company, about the dreams he'd been chasing for the past 3 years. Chef Tech Solutions had been Marcus's passion project since before they were married. He'd started it with David and Gwen, his college roommate, in David's garage. They'd bootstrapped, taken out loans, maxed out credit cards. Marcus had quit a secure job as a software engineer at Microsoft to pursue this dream, and Sarah had supported him, even when it meant living on just her teacher's salary, even when it meant postponing buying a house, even when it meant saying no to vacations and new cars and all the comfortable middle-class pleasures their friends were enjoying. She'd watched him pour himself into Chef Tech, watched him come home exhausted night after night, watched him make calls to potential investors who turned him down, watched him revise business plans and pitch decks and financial projections until his eyes were red. She believed in him. She believed in Chef Tech. But she also knew that Marcus was proud, perhaps too proud. He wanted to succeed on his own terms, to prove that he could build something from nothing without handouts, without shortcuts. If she told him about the inheritance and offered to invest in Chef Tech, would he accept it? Would it feel like charity to him? Would it undermine everything he was trying to prove to himself? And there was something else, something she was almost ashamed to acknowledge. The inheritance was hers. For the first time in her adult life, she had something that was entirely her own, not tied to her identity as Marcus's wife or as a teacher or as anyone other than Sarah Whitfield Chun, individual human being. She didn't want to hoard it, didn't want to be selfish with it, but she also wanted to make her own choice about how to use it, to honor her great-aunt's instructions in her own way. Over the following weeks, an idea had begun to form. What if she could invest in Marcus's company without him knowing it was her? What if she could give him the funding he needed while still allowing him to feel like he'd earned it on his own merits? What if she could be both generous and invisible? It had seemed, in those late-night hours of planning, like the perfect solution. She could help Marcus, honor her great-aunt's wishes, and preserve her own agency all at once. She'd started researching, learning about shell companies and investment vehicles, about how the wealthy stayed anonymous. She discovered that it was surprisingly easy to obscure your identity if you had money and knew the right lawyers and accountants. She'd set up Meridian Ventures as an LLC, hiring a real venture capital firm to manage the actual paperwork and meetings. She created the Catherine Whitfield persona, complete with a backstory and a website and references from other, fictional, successful investments. It had been exciting at first, like playing a role in a movie. She bought wigs and different clothes, practiced changing her voice and mannerisms. She'd studied other venture capitalists, watching how they moved and talked, what questions they asked. And then had come the day of that first pitch meeting, when she walked into a conference room and looked at her husband, and he looked right through her, seeing only a potential investor, not recognizing the woman he kissed goodbye every morning. Part 3. The deal. The negotiations had taken 3 months. Sarah, as Catherine Whitfield, had been careful, thorough, asking all the questions a real investor would ask. She'd reviewed Chef Tekka's books with a forensic accountant, studied their market position, interviewed key employees, always when Marcus wasn't around, conducted due diligence as rigorous as any she'd read about in the business journals she'd been devouring. Part of it was maintaining her cover, but part of it was genuine. She needed to know if Chef Tech was actually a good investment or if she was letting her love for Marcus cloud her judgment. Her great aunt had trusted her to use this gift wisely, and she owed it to that trust to make smart decisions. The deeper she dug, the more impressed she became. Marcus and David had built something real. The technology was innovative, the business model sound, the market timing right. Yes, they were burning through cash, and yes, their runway was limited, but that was the nature of tech startups. They needed capital to scale, to move from promising startup to viable company. Chef Tech wasn't charity case. It was actually a good investment. Sarah found that knowledge deeply satisfying. She wasn't just helping her husband out of loyalty or love. She was making a smart financial decision that happened to benefit someone she cared about. The term sheet she prepared was generous but not suspicious. $10 million for a 15% stake in the company, with standard provisions for board representation and reporting requirements. It was a kind of deal that a mid-tier venture capital firm might offer to a promising Series A company. The day Marcus had called to tell her about the investment, Sarah had been in their kitchen making dinner, her hands covered in flour from the bread she was kneading. "Sarah," he'd shouted, bursting through the door. "Sarah, we did it." She'd turned, startled, to see him standing there with the biggest smile she'd seen in months. "Did what?" she'd asked, even though she already knew, had known for 3 days since her lawyers had sent the final paperwork. "We got funding, $10 million. There's this VC firm, Meridian Ventures, and they believe in what we're doing. Sarah, this changes everything. We can hire the team we need. We can expand manufacturing. We can finally compete with the big players." He'd picked her up and spun her around, not caring about the flour that transferred from her hands to his shirt. She'd laughed, genuine joy mixing with the strange vertigo of watching your own machinations play out from the inside. "Marcus, that's incredible. Tell me everything." And he had, over dinner, words tumbling out in an excited rush. He'd told her about Catherine Whitfield, the sharp-eyed investor who'd asked tough questions but ultimately saw the vision. He'd told her about the terms, which he'd negotiated down from 17% to 15%, proud of his business acumen. He'd told her about how this would change their lives, how they could finally think about buying a house, maybe even starting a family. Sarah had listened, smiled, congratulated, all while feeling like she was watching herself from outside her own body. This was what she'd wanted. Marcus getting the opportunity he deserved, the recognition he'd earned. So why did it feel so strange? That night, after Marcus had fallen asleep beside her, exhausted from celebration and champagne, Sarah had lain awake staring at the ceiling. She'd done it. She'd pulled off a deception. She was now secretly one of the primary investors in her husband's company, and he had no idea. She'd told herself it was noble, that she was protecting his pride while supporting his dreams. But in the darkness, doubts crept in. Was this really about protecting Marcus, or was it about her own desire for control? Was she being generous or manipulative? Was there even a difference? She'd pushed the doubts away. The deal was done. Chef Tech had its funding. Marcus was happy. That's what mattered. Part 4, the double life. Living a double life turned out to be exhausting in ways Sarah had never anticipated. As Sarah Chun, elementary school teacher and supportive wife, she maintained her normal routine. She woke up early to prepare lessons for her third graders, kissed Marcus goodbye as he headed to the Chef Tech offices, spent her days teaching 8-year-olds about multiplication and the water cycle, came home to grade papers and make dinner. But 3 times a week, she was Catherine Whitfield. Those days, she'd tell Marcus she was staying after school for curriculum planning or teacher training. Instead, she'd meet with Chef Tekka's management team, reviewing financial reports and strategic plans. She'd sit in boardrooms, that blonde wig perfectly styled, those blue contacts making her eyes look cold and analytical, asking questions about market penetration and customer acquisition costs. The board meetings were the hardest. She sat across the table from Marcus, watching him present quarterly results, listening to him defend strategic decisions, seeing him nervous when the numbers didn't quite hit the projections. As Catherine, she had to be critical, had to push him, had to play the role of the demanding investor who wanted returns. "Your customer acquisition cost is rising," she'd say, her voice deliberately different from her natural tone, slightly lower with crisper consonants. "You're spending 32% more per customer than you projected. Explain." And Marcus would explain, his jaw tight, his hands gesturing as he walked through the challenges of competing against established brands, the need for increased marketing spend to break through the noise. As Catherine, she'd nod, make notes, keep her expression neutral. Inside, as Sarah, she wanted to reach across the table and squeeze his hand, tell him he was doing an amazing job, that she was proud of him. The cognitive dissonance was dizzying. At home, she'd listen to Marcus vent about Catherine over dinner. "She's tough," he'd say, stabbing at his pasta. "I mean, she's fair, but God, she doesn't let anything slide. Every board meeting feels like an interrogation." "That's her job," Sarah would say carefully. "She invested $10 million. She has a right to protect that investment." I know. And honestly, she makes good points. It's just, sometimes I feel like I'm back in school, defending my dissertation to a committee that's looking for reasons to fail me." Sarah would murmur sympathetically, pour more wine, change the subject, and she'd feel the weight of the secret pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The worst part was the lying, not the big lie, the secret investment, the hidden identity, but the constant small lies required to maintain it. Lies about where she'd been, who she'd been with, what she'd been doing. Each one felt like a tiny betrayal, eroding the foundation of trust their marriage was built on. "How was your day?" Marcus would ask, and she'd tell him about her students, about the field trip to the Science Museum, about the parent-teacher conferences. All true, but she wouldn't mention the 3 hours she'd spent in a conference room, analyzing Chef Tekka's cash flow projections, making decisions about his company's future. She became adept at compartmentalization, at keeping Sarah and Catherine separate in her mind. Sarah was warm, nurturing, emotional. Catherine was cool, analytical, distant. Sarah wore jeans and sweaters, minimal makeup, her dark hair in a practical ponytail. Catherine wore power suits and heels, full makeup, that blonde wig styled perfectly. Sometimes Sarah would catch herself using Catherine's voice with her students, or using Sarah's mannerisms in a board meeting, and she'd have to course-correct quickly, terrified of the walls between her identities crumbling. 6 months after the investment, Chef Tech launched its third product, a smart refrigerator that could track inventory, suggest recipes based on what you had, and automatically order groceries when you ran low. The launch was successful beyond projections, with pre-orders exceeding expectations by 40%. Marcus was ecstatic. Sarah, watching him present the results of the board meeting, felt a fierce pride that she couldn't express. Catherine Whitfield simply nodded and asked about profit margins. But that night, at the launch party that Chef Tech threw for employees and investors, both sides of Sarah's life collided in a way she hadn't anticipated. As Sarah Chun, wife of the CEO, she was expected to attend. She wore a simple black dress, her real hair styled elegantly, her brown eyes bright with genuine excitement. She mingled with employees she'd never met, talked to Marcus's co-founder David and his wife, smiled for photos that would go on the company's social media. And then she saw Catherine Whitfield. Or rather, she saw an actress she'd hired to play Catherine Whitfield at public events. The woman was in her 50s, sophisticated, with natural blonde hair and blue eyes. Sarah had found her through a theatrical agency, paying her a generous fee to make occasional appearances as Catherine Whitfield at events where Sarah couldn't afford to be seen in both roles. Marcus was talking to Catherine across the room, laughing at something she'd said. Sarah watched them, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips, feeling reality tilt on its axis. This was insane. She'd hired an actress to pretend to be her fake identity so she could maintain her real identity. The layers of deception were making her dizzy. Sarah, David's wife Jennifer, touched her arm. "Are you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," Sarah said automatically, forcing a smile. "Just Overwhelmed. This is such a big night. It really is. Marcus must be over the moon. You both must be so relieved. Relieved. Yes, that was one word for it. Another word might be terrified, or drowning, or losing my grip on reality. Sarah watched Marcus introduce Catherine to some of the newer employees. The actress was good. She had the mannerisms down, the cool professional demeanor, the way of tilting her head when listening that Sarah had developed for the character. Come on, Jennifer said, linking her arm through Sarah's. Let's go congratulate the woman who made this all possible. Have you met Catherine Whitfield yet? No, Sarah said weakly. No, I haven't. Jennifer steered her across the room, and then Sarah was standing face to face with her own creation, her doppelganger, the woman she became 3 times a week. Catherine, Jennifer said warmly, I'd like you to meet Sarah Chun, Marcus's wife. Sarah, this is Catherine Whitfield from Meridian Ventures. The actress extended her hand, and Sarah shook it, feeling like she was trapped in a surreal dream. It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Chun, the actress said in the voice Sarah had trained her to use. Your husband is doing remarkable work. Thank you, Sarah managed, and thank you for believing in him. In Chef Tech. It's been an excellent investment, the actress said, with a slight smile that Sarah recognized as her own. Marcus has exceeded every projection. You must be very proud. I am, Sarah said, and meant it, even though the situation was absurd. They made small talk for a few more minutes before Jennifer pulled Sarah away to meet someone else. Sarah spent the rest of the evening in a daze, maintaining her smile, making appropriate responses, all while feeling like she was watching herself from very far away. When they got home that night, Marcus pulled her into his arms. Thank you, he said. For what? For supporting me through everything. The lean years, the uncertainty, the times I wasn't sure we'd make it. Tonight wouldn't have happened without you. Sarah held him tight, her face pressed against his shoulder, so he couldn't see her expression. I love you, she said, which was true. I believe in you, she said, which was also true. What she didn't say was, I'm the reason tonight happened. That $10 million came from me. That tough investor pushing you to excel is me. Everything you're celebrating is built on a foundation of my lies. Part 5, The Cracks. The first year of Chef Tech's growth was explosive. With proper funding, Marcus and David hired a world-class team. Engineers from Apple and Google, designers from IDEO, marketing people from Nike. They opened a proper office in downtown Seattle with a test kitchen and a fabrication lab and a conference room with the city view that Marcus had always dreamed of. The product improved. Chef Tech 3.0, released 18 months after Sarah's investment, won awards from tech journals and cooking magazines alike. Their revenue grew by 300%. They signed partnerships with Williams-Sonoma and Sir Law Table. They were featured in Wired, in Forbes, in the Wall Street Journal. Marcus was working longer hours than ever, but he was happy, genuinely, radiantly happy in a way Sarah hadn't seen since they first met. He was building something real, proving that his vision could change the world. And Sarah was proud of him. That part was never in doubt. Watching him succeed, watching Chef Tech grow from a garage project to a real company with real impact, filled her with joy. But the double life was taking its toll. She had to quit her teaching job, telling Marcus it was because she wanted to focus on starting a family, a lie that made her stomach hurt, but necessary. The truth was she couldn't maintain her cover while working full-time as a teacher. The board meetings alone took up 15 hours a week, plus travel to investor conferences, plus the constant due diligence and research required to play the role convincingly. She'd hired a wealth management firm to handle most of the inheritance, investing it conservatively while keeping enough liquid to maintain her Catherine Whitfield operations. She bought a small apartment in a building downtown, using a shell company, where she could store Catherine's clothes and transform between identities without risk of Marcus finding her wigs and contact lenses. Her life had become a logistical puzzle, a constant balancing act of calendars and alibis and carefully constructed stories. Are you okay? Marcus asked her one Sunday morning, as they lay in bed with coffee and the New York Times. You seem distant lately. I'm fine, Sarah said automatically, then softened it with a smile. Just thinking about stuff, about the future. Me too, Marcus said, reaching for her hand. I've been thinking maybe it's time for us to buy a house. A real house, not this apartment. With Chef Tech stable now, we can actually afford it. Maybe something with a yard, good schools nearby. He paused, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. Sarah, I think we should start trying for a baby. Sarah's chest tightened. A baby. It was something they'd talked about in the abstract for years, always postponing it until Chef Tech was stable, until they had more money, until the timing was right. But how could she have a baby while maintaining this deception? How could she be pregnant, vulnerable, needing Marcus's support, while also sneaking around behind his back, managing a secret investment portfolio, pretending to be someone else? That sounds wonderful, she heard herself say. Let's talk about it more seriously. Make some plans. Marcus kissed her, and Sarah kissed him back, feeling the familiar warmth of their connection, the ease of their intimacy. And she felt like a fraud. That afternoon, she told him she was going to visit a friend. Instead, she went to her secret apartment and sat on the floor in Catherine's clothes, staring at the wig in her hands, and cried. This wasn't sustainable. She couldn't keep living two lives, couldn't keep lying to the person she loved most. The guilt was eating her alive from the inside out. But what were her options? Tell Marcus the truth now, after 2 years of deception? How would he react? Would he understand that she'd done it out of love, out of a desire to help him while preserving his pride? Or would he feel betrayed, manipulated, angry that she'd been pulling strings behind his back? And what about Chef Tech? Her investment had been crucial to its success. If Marcus demanded that she divest, sell her shares, get out of his company, it could destabilize everything. Other investors might get nervous. The board structure would have to change. It could damage the company just as it was hitting its stride. She was trapped by her own cleverness, caught in a web of her own weaving. The crisis came in year 3. Chef Tech was preparing for a Series B funding round. They wanted to raise $50 million to expand internationally, to scale production, to hire aggressively. It was a natural next step for a successful startup, the bridge between promising company and genuine market leader. As Catherine Whitfield, Sarah had to participate in the due diligence for the new investors. That meant more meetings, more scrutiny, more time away from home. As Sarah Chun, she was increasingly isolated. She'd lost touch with most of her teacher friends after quitting. She couldn't make plans because she never knew when Catherine would be needed. She'd started declining invitations from Marcus's colleagues because she couldn't risk someone recognizing her as Catherine. Her world had shrunk to 2 people. Marcus, who she loved but constantly lied to, and herself, split into incompatible pieces. The new lead investor was a firm called Redwood Capital, run by a man named Thomas Brightwell. He was thorough, aggressive, and uncomfortably perceptive. Tell me about Meridian Ventures, he said to Marcus in a meeting Sarah attended as Catherine. I've looked into them, and it's oddly difficult to find information. Their track record seems almost too good. No failed investments? No exits. Sarah felt her heart rate spike. She'd been careful constructing Catherine's background, but maybe not careful enough. Catherine's been an excellent partner, Marcus said, glancing at her with what looked like genuine respect. Tough but fair, always focused on the company's long-term success. I'm sure, Brightwell said, his eyes sharp, but I need to understand the cap table fully. Who exactly is behind Meridian? A family office, Sarah said smoothly, using Catherine's voice. Clients who value their privacy. Everything is properly documented and legally compliant. Of course, Brightwell said, but his expression suggested he wasn't satisfied. After meeting, Marcus pulled Catherine aside. Sarah's stomach clenched. She hated these one-on-one moments, always terrified that Marcus would suddenly see through the disguise. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next episode.